Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Live with Dan. We have a special episode today, a continuation of our 2023 consumer research trends that we did a webinar on back in January, and it's already March, so I can't believe it. But we have, Jon Last from Sportsleisure Research Group here again, and then Steve Kraus, who's a professor at the University of San Francisco, is here with us again. And gentlemen, welcome.
Good to be back.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So, over a month ago now, I'm not sure where February went, but here we are, early March. We're coming back together to discuss some of the Q&A that came up during the webinar that we did. So we had a lot of interesting questions. I know we tackled a few during the webinar, but so many came in, and I think we all thought it'd be good to gather again and discuss some of these questions that came up. So with that, let's get to it, unless you guys have anything you want to start with.
How about it?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, perfect. So I know this might have come up in your barometer, Jon, or even Steve. I know we asked some questions around it, but there was someone from Newbank wanted to know, like, are consumers willing to acquire debt in 2023? What's the outlook there? I think kind of an interesting question with the recession that is looming, might happen, might not happen. Are we in one? Who really knows? But what do you say to this?
What's really interesting, and I think other people have commented on this as well, is that you've got this dichotomous situation where people are kind of saying that things are going to heck in a handbasket, but they're still spending like there's no tomorrow, and maybe that's what
Hmm.
it is. We asked a question that we've repeated in the barometer the last couple of months about whether people are planning to make a major expenditure in the next 6 months, and basically 70% are saying that they would be planning on it, which
Wow.
kind of amazes me. That even though we're seeing reports from economists about the credit limits kind of being stretched again, and people are kind of being a little bit more cautious, at least when it comes to discretionary purchases, things like homes and cars and other want to haves versus need to haves. People are still spending, and
Hmm.
it means piling on debt. Sounds like they're going to keep doing it, at least in
Yeah,
the short to medium term.
yeah, interesting. Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's going to be kind of a push and pull. It always is, but I think it'll be a little more intense this year between, I think consumers, a lot of them have a mindset of, well, this should be the year of living frugally because there's so
Mm.
much uncertainty. You even had Jeff Bezos come out and say, hey, consumers, if I were you, I'd hold back on some of those big purchases.
Right.
But I think on the flip side, I think that consumers they're exhausted after the pandemic. We may talk about here again today. I think a focus on mental health is going to be a big trend as consumers are trying to, you know, deal with the stress and anxiety. And they're saying there's got to be something more in life. And I think that
Hmm.
is going to translate to discretionary spending for that kind of stuff that feels like it's speaking to mental health, whether that's travel. I know, Jon, you had some interesting numbers on travel, whether it's the discretionary purchase that makes you feel good. I think there's such a desire to get back to normal. And then, Jon, this is another thing you've also touched on in your barometer, that there's a strong desire to get back to normal. And then you do those things that you used to do before that sort of feels like, well, this is getting back to normal. And then it's not as satisfying as it used to be. And I think so there's still a hunger. Oh, well, this didn't work. I got to do something else to kind of pick up my mood.
Yeah, no, we're still seeing that, and I think the other dynamic that you add to it is what we've been calling or referring to as the great reprioritization. I think we shared some of that in the January presentation as well, but we have folks that it's just incredible to see the resiliency of hybrid and or work from home. It's still sitting at 50% that are not working full time out of the home, and with that comes the opportunity to really take better control of your time, and that often
Hmm.
means allocating it to things that are considered to be just rewards. And again, in the leisure and sports categories that we focus on, there's still a real bullishness in terms of people's perspectives about what they are doing and what they're going to do. Now, if things really dramatically change, that could also affect things, but right now, at least in the first quarter, it's been full steam ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, if we look ahead to like the summer of 2023, only a few months away, do we think that these trends are going to continue? What are some of those summer trends that might be coming up? Have we looked at that at all?
Yeah, I've got a hunch about this. And
Okay.
here's my little catchphrase. It's going to be hot girl summer on steroids. So
Okay.
if you know the phrase "hot girl summer," it comes from a Megan Thee Stallion album from a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
and and the idea is that when summer comes around, a girl's got to live her best life and be herself and be out there and having fun, and it's a certain kind of mindset. And I think that kind of mindset is gonna go mainstream. It's gonna be out there among everybody. It's gonna
Mm.
be. I think there's such an exhaustion. I call it, it's the great exhaustion that precedes the great reprioritization.
Interesting. All right.
And when it comes to be summer, people are going to be able to, they're going to try really hard to relax. They're going to try really hard to let down a little bit. They've been,
Mm.
juggling with all of the stuff that comes with working from home, which is great and it's convenient, but it's also kind of a jumbling of work and life, and it's hard to really relax when you're working so much at home and there are all those work associations with home. So I
Right.
think when summer rolls around, I think travel is going to be big, and just that mindset of, wow, I'm really gonna focus on me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, John. It's probably good for the sports and leisure industries too, right? If that's the
Absolutely. I mean, we're
case.
seeing it. We're seeing it a lot in a lot of our travel specific work. I mean, to Stephen's point, it's very much anticipatory. We're seeing a big increase in people thinking about resuming international travel, which is something that obviously is a positive sign. I think another contributing factor to it, I think, again, we shared some of this back in January, but the latest data only amplifies it. People are stressed out, and
Hmm.
that means they're seeking a release. So I like where you're going with that whole hot girl summer metaphor, because I think,
Hmm.
that becomes a great opportunity to release. And, we're clearly seeing it in travel, and we're seeing it in sports too. We're seeing it with ticket sales. We're seeing it with fan engagement. And obviously, one of the things that the pandemic has really accelerated within sports has been a zest for creativity and finding remote connection points, and really fully leveraging some of the digital assets that teams and leagues have done. You're seeing it with the proliferation of all of these reality series, whether it's the new Full Swing that just came out about the PGA
Hmm.
Tour, and the F1 series that preceded it. I know the NFL just announced they're going to be investing significantly into some similar types of content, and they obviously began that whole trend with the Hard Knocks series. So you
Hmm.
create all of these incremental touch points, and it builds demand, and it builds greater connectivity points across lots of different ways that people are now living their lives.
No,
Yeah,
I will say to that point, the kind of a side note, the Full Swing documentary, I'm working my way through that now. It's super interesting just to see the other side that you don't see, Thursday through Sunday as a spectator. John, you might be more familiar with some of the stuff given your involvement in the industry, but for me, it's been super interesting just to follow, some of these players, the lives they live on both, like, on one side you have the Dustin Johnsons of the world, and you have, the Damons of the world too that are, working to make a living on the tour, right? So it's kind of interesting to see this, but
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, in a lot of the anecdotal conversations that I've had with people that are not as deeply into the golf industry as I am, I'm getting similar reactions. I don't want to sound jaded, because a lot of this is just, it's nice to see it out there,
yeah,
because it's stuff that we've all been familiar with, and it's always been, again, really kind of focusing on golf for a second. It's something that always enamored me to the industry, because of just the way it's such a different structure. It has been for a long time such a different structure than other professional sports, with the independence of it. And it's nice to see that people are getting a closer look at that now with the series.
yeah, interesting. I
yeah,
agree. Steve,
yeah,
what you were gonna add
yeah.
something too.
Speaking of summer and sports, I think that this summer there will be a lot of discussion about baseball, because
Mm.
baseball's got some big rule changes. Most of them specifically designed to speed the game up. And there's
Hmm.
kind of been, hey, among baseball, we've lost the Gen Z, we've lost the millennial. It's too slow. It's not engaging, and it's not going to become like a basketball game. But I think it will be much much faster paced, much easier for people to digest. I think there'll be a lot of discussion about baseball.
If you've watched any spring training or seen some of the early numbers, I mean, they're shaving 25 to 30 minutes off of the typical game time. I watched a game last night. It's definitely addressing a lot of the things that MLB has been looking at for many years. We've been fortunate enough to be part of some of that. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, again, I'm a ringer. I love baseball. I would watch baseball 24 hours a day if I could, but it is nice to see the product evolving in a way that will finally actualize on some of the things that, people have been concerned about for the last several years.
Baseball historically has been a little resistant to social media. Basketball has been very open, and it's almost to the point where I think a lot of younger people, will see a few seconds of a highlight on a basketball game on TikTok, and they'll be like, oh, I watched the game. And so I wonder if baseball opens up a little bit about the rights and use of clips on social media, if that'll make a difference.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting, I've always found that I feel like the NFL and NBA do a better job at marketing their players than baseball does. And I think that has, some effect, obviously, on people following it and on social media as well, to your point, Steve. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know if we want to go down that path for the rest of this conversation.
No, we probably shouldn't, but
with the whole focus on stars and superheroes and just that's been a big topic of conversation in our shop of late, and in baseball for a lot of reasons maybe wasn't as quick to that party. I've got mixed thoughts on it, but again, that's probably a different conversation for a different time.
Yeah, no. So I mean, we kind of touched on social media and so forth, but anything? Do you guys have any data points around the evolution of confidence in social media, and has that improved, not improved, it kind of stayed the same? I know there's obviously some debate, and we can talk about news as well and kind of bundle that in, the confidence level that people have in these different outlets.
We asked it a couple of months ago in the barometer. I don't have the exact figure at my fingertips, but it definitely kind of painted a picture of skepticism. But but that didn't necessarily suggest that people were going to be able to wean themselves off the addiction. So it kind of creates a further level of confusion, perhaps contributes to some of that morose about the direction things are going that we see in other data. But it's also almost like the genie's out of the bottle and you can't put her back in.
Right.
Yeah, I think consumers are becoming much more skeptical consumers of what they see on social media. I remember years ago I used to say that thinking about Yelp reviews, that when consumers look at Yelp reviews, they view it as like a gymnastics judge in the Olympics, and you've got to throw out the highest score and the lowest score. You've got to throw out the five best reviews and the 5 worst reviews, because you just can't trust either of those, and sort of see what's left in the middle to try to discern what are accurate reviews. And I think it comes to that when it comes to use of social media. I watch a lot of TikTok to try to keep up on trends, and I always say to somebody, oh, I saw this TikTok on such and so first of all, it was on TikTok, so it may or may not be true, but the larger point was yada yada yada. So I think consumers have become much more skeptical about what they see on social media. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's the algorithm figuring out what I'm interested in, but I see so much more about UFOs since we've been shooting things down.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'm like, who really believes it? I do think there's a lot of confirmation bias that goes on social media. So the algorithm figures out what you like and what you believe, and it'll feed you up that. So I think that's where hopefully there will be more skepticism when you see stuff on social media that's just reinforcing what you already believe. I hope people are going to take a bit more of a step back and critically evaluate that.
I think it's true. I think it's true on that. Oh, go ahead, John. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it kind of raises an interesting research question, right? Because, for so many years, we've kind of adapted and molded to the whole social listening side of understanding what people think. And, I've always been one that's been somewhat hesitant about its place, just because it's so filtered and it's so reflective of whatever narrative it is that you may be wanting to go to, as opposed to, objective sampling methodologies. But yet it's still there, and it's still something that people are going to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think, to see to your point around, social media feeding you things that you're interested in. I'm kind of thinking in my head, is it that much different than like if someone, let's say they're Fox News or CNN and that's all they watch constantly, like they're still getting that same, I would say, like almost biased information, right? Because of the different sources. So what's the difference if it's on social media or if it's on, the news that they're watching? Like it's kind of the same thing if you think about it, at least in my mind. But
yeah, there was that, if you watch the show, I think it was Succession. There was a little bit on there about a reference to something that really happened, that people who were into Fox News were watching so much Fox News that the Fox News logo was getting burned into their TV screen. And so the TV manufacturers went to Fox News and were saying, hey, is there something you can do about that? We get calls all the time that, my screen isn't working because the Fox News logo is there all the time. And so that's why the logo rotates. That's the change.
Oh, really?
News made, so it doesn't burn into your TV. And I think that was parodied sort of on Succession, but that was,
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a real thing. So there's that confirmation bias is pervasive and kind of fundamental to how people's minds work. And I honestly don't think that the trouble that Fox News is having right now is going to make one bit of difference in that.
Right. No, I'd agree. By the way, Succession is a great show. So if you haven't watched it, definitely check it out. I enjoy it.
Yes, really good. And, there's an interesting marketing angle to it. And I've seen some TikToks on this, is that the way the people on Succession dress is a really accurate portrayal of how billionaires dress. And it's like it's well designed and it's well made, but it's very light on the logos. It's one of those, they don't want to be showy. If you're if you're in the club, you realize that's, and there are certain brands, Laura Piano and that kind of thing. The hats they wear, which look like, pure black baseball caps, are like $1,000 baseball caps.
Right.
So, luxury at that level, when you get to billionaires, is very much about stealth wealth, and it's less about showy logos. And the show captures that in a really interesting way.
Yeah, interesting. No logo required, I guess, huh? You just kind of, if you know, you know.
Exactly.
Interesting. So, kind of switching gears, I think let's talk a little bit about, inflation. And there was a question that came up around, how will consumer markets be affected by inflation and shortages of skilled workers? I think maybe, John, you might have some information on this with the barometer and maybe the restaurant industry or something like that. But what are you guys seeing on for this?
We ask an ongoing question about perceptions of inflation, and we bring it, we cut it across consumer goods as well as some more discretionary areas. And that's been pretty much stuck. I mean, we did see a little bit of improvement in that towards the end of last year and in January, but in February, it's kind of back up again. Folks are still feeling it pretty significantly. Again, to my earlier point, it's not necessarily impeding their desire or their actualization in certain areas. And one thing that we've consistently seen is that the perceptions of inflation are much less when you're looking at travel categories than you are for consumer goods. So it's almost like one's own interpretation of value, right? The prices may actually be up, but if they're still deriving a requisite level of satisfaction from it, it's not as painful to be, or as conscious perhaps, that they're making that increased spend. So that's something that, I think we always have to be mindful of too, right? Because if I always talk about perceived costs being expensive isn't necessarily a bad thing if people feel that they're getting that quality for it. So, the short answer is that is still the top issue and concern that people have. And we have people evaluate, what are their biggest concerns in the country right now. It has seen a little bit of modulation in the early part of the year, but like I said, the most recent February data, it began to creep up a little bit again.
Yeah, I think consumers have a mindset of, inflation. Yeah, what are you going to do? They still got to buy their groceries. they're still going to go ahead and buy their vacation packages.
Right.
I think it's something that consumers worry about. It kind of occupies their mind space, and they fit it into whatever political narrative that they already believe. So there are people who say inflation. Well, there you go. There's Joe Biden's American for you. And there are other people that say, inflation. Well, most of the inflation that's out there is really caused by an increase in corporate profits, and companies are doing great, and we're not doing anything to, create, excess taxes or, taxes on exorbitant profits. So I think people just fit it into whatever political mindset they already have and say, I don't have any control over that. So I think it's something they worry about, but I don't know that it's changing their behavior that much.
Right. And I guess, speaking of behavior and shopping, there was a question that came up around, and they were looking for updated stats on shopping trends. So has COVID forever changed the way consumers shop, or what do you guys think about that?
I think I was looking at some numbers recently about online grocery shopping. And it's kind of just for me personally, when my car broke down a few weeks ago, I was without a car for a little while, and so I ordered my groceries online, and I'm like, wow, this is just like the pandemic. I haven't done this since the pandemic was really hitting hard. And if you look at the numbers, obviously there was that huge increase in e-commerce, especially in grocery, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's completely leveled off since then. It hasn't gone back down, but it hasn't continued to grow really at all. And I was just looking at some numbers from the Commerce Department in the U.S. Census that keeps track of what % of all U.S. retail sales are online. And right now it's about 14%. And so when I go out and speak, I usually ask the audience that, and people will say, 40%, 50%.
Yeah.
And it's, and, it used to be, 8, 9, 10%. It was growing very slowly. Big jump up in Q2 of 2020 with the pandemic. And after that, it's really like a step function. It's gone straight across.
Yeah, the 14% is surprising to me. I thought it'd be higher, but interesting.
Yeah, obviously it's going to vary by category, but yeah, I know when I've seen those stats, particularly in some of the verticals that we look at, it kind of surprises you because that's what everybody's always talking about it. It's almost like the other parallel that I had, and I don't recall if we presented this in January or not, was people's interest levels in electric vehicles, right? I mean, you hear so much about it like every day that you think it's going to be a majority of people that are driving them, and clearly our data shows that that's not the case in the immediate short term. Now, our data did show that there was a much higher interest level generationally based on, unfortunately, I think the three of us all get cut off, but younger than us. Well, maybe not Dan. He's the youngster of the group. Anyway, it's interesting because you would surmise that that's so much more pervasive, particularly if we're living in a big city like the three of us are.
Right. No, it's interesting too, and I think one of the trends is that I think really accelerated during COVID, and I guess it's kind of a mix of the brick and mortar versus online. It's like the curbside pickup, right? And that's been convenient, I think. And I know it was there before, but I feel like obviously for reasons we all know, it really picked up during COVID. So I think that might be a trend that continues. I think people still enjoy that, whether you're getting groceries or Target or whatever it might be. It feels like all these, quote unquote, brick and mortar businesses are doing that. So that's kind of an interesting trend.
Yeah, I had an unfortunate BOPUS experience, buy online and pick up in store, as I ordered from Home Depot a big pond liner. It's
Oh yeah.
For my yard, and it's hard. It's not like something you roll out. It's like a hard shell big thing, and instead of getting it shipped to my house, I could save a lot of money by just going to pick it up in the store. And then got there and realized it was way too big for my little Toyota Prius. So I, as a sad ragamuffin, had to walk around the parking lot finding people who were walking back to their pickup truck and saying, "Hey, can I pay you $20 to deliver this to my house?"
Right.
So that was the end of my buy online, pick up in store. I will pay the extra money and like just bring it to me. But if you look at the online sales data, for years people have been saying, retail is dead, the in-person store experience is dead, and I think really that kind of mindset came from thinking about classic department stores, thinking about JCPenney and Sears and Kmart, and I think there it was less about the fact that they were primarily in-person retail stores and more that they were stores that had built their value proposition on serving the great American middle class. And that middle class isn't there anymore. So in retail, you saw this huge fragmentation where you've got, Walmart at the very low end, and then you've got Target, and, department stores have struggled a little bit. There's been a lot of, targeted marketing and segmentation and all of that. But certainly, Walmart has done very well because they've really mastered, omni channels, a bit of an old word, but, Target has done very well in online sales. So I think it's those big brands that have been able to leverage all the distribution channels that have really continued to thrive.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. And, with Amazon, seemingly, taking over everything, that's what, people say. It's interesting to me how they still put their like pickup and return locations in retail stores. So it gets people there, which then as they're walking out, they buy something. So it's kind of interesting how that's come more, I guess not quite full circle, but the online trend is helping out the classic brick and mortar. So
returns have been a big barrier in e-commerce, from the start, especially in some of those categories where it really hasn't taken off. John's absolutely right that those kind of numbers differ a lot by category. And if you look at clothing or apparel, that's one of the categories where online sales really haven't taken over like they have in some of the more commodity industries. If you look at, where people buy batteries, a huge percentage of that is online because, you're not going to return them and you don't really care about the brand, and Amazon Basics is just fine. But in apparel, that's an area where there's much less of it online, that the big brands have tried to figure it out with the big retailers by buying other brands. Walmart bought ModCloth. They've tried to buy subscription services for apparel, but that whole returns thing has just been such a big barrier. I think they're still trying to figure it out.
There's also still the entertainment side of it, particularly again in those high touch categories or high involvement purchase decision categories where people still, you pile onto it that same cabin fever that I think people are still trying to break out of to some degree, that if you can create a compelling retail environment, and it kind of goes back to the old retail as entertainment trend that we saw probably 20 years ago. It creates another reason for people to be out there. I actually had a chance a couple of weeks ago to walk through the new, what do they call it? The big mall right across from the Meadowlands, American Dream, which is the biggest, I guess it's the biggest mall in the country right now. It was packed. I mean, it was just, and obviously, if you're not familiar with this property, they literally have an indoor ski slope and a Ferris wheel and a big roller coaster in it. But I mean, just the main retail plazas were steaming with people. And so much of it, I think, is inspirational as well, because one thing that, even with the proliferation of online commerce, that is a much more targeted type of purchase. People are kind of going for a specific need. And there's still that entertainment and that upsell side of being out and seeing everything around you. We always used to talk about in the golf industry, and we kind of amplified it a little bit when we talked about how men and women shop differently. So there was a great graphic that somebody once showed at a presentation at a conference I was at, where it showed like how a man goes into a store versus how a woman goes into a store, and the woman was like a bunch of squiggly lines across all these different departments, and the guy was like straight in and straight out. The variation was, when it was something that the guys were interested in, and that was something we looked at a lot in golf retail, where people, guys will spend an hour or 2 hours trying out all the latest equipment, and then of course they're going to have to go in a simulator and get their latest numbers. So it's so contingent upon what somebody's category is, and I think a lot of what drives it from the work that we've done has been the category involvement that people have. It's as you said, Steve. If it's a commodity, it's a lot easier to just kind of do that straight in and out pathway that online commerce has done. But if it's something that creates a little bit more wonderment, then then people are going to look for ways to expand that experience.
Yeah, wonderment is a great word. I think another category that's really struggling to figure it out and is under a lot of pressure is movie theaters. Between the pandemic took us completely out of that habit. Streaming is so much better. There's so much, they call it prestige TV, because everybody talks about, now it's The Last of Us or White Lotus or, I'm sort of behind on a lot of that because I actually canceled my Netflix subscription a few months ago because I felt like, I've seen everything on Netflix, and they had such an emphasis on quantity over quality. But now they've really stepped up their game.
Yeah, they have.
So
yeah.
I think movie theaters are struggling to be creative. Word came out that some of them are going to start to charge, a premium for the good seats. I think they're going to continue to struggle, and I think they're going to have to go much more in the direction of, kind of a quality experience, an Alamo Draft House kind of thing where you can eat, you've got comfy chairs. It's got to be a more engaging experience than it has been.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we did some work. The theater owners, the National Association of Theater Owners, was a barometer subscriber for a while, so we certainly felt their collective pain. But I mean, in many ways, it's not that different from what we've seen evolve in sporting venues. It's so much of any new building that's opening up today has to have these large, expansive social spaces and interactive activities, and the ability to reach out to a much broader audience, which has been great because it's helped create the event around the event. We've often defined a segment that's very important in event marketing in sports marketing called the event enthusiast. And this is somebody who isn't necessarily going primarily because they've been rabidly following a particular team or a particular season, but because this is a place to be. And, that whole aspect of participatory fandom, I think it's certainly been part and parcel to a lot of things. People are collecting experiences now, and that transcends and should transcend a lot of different areas where people spend their time.
Yeah, interesting. So I know we have maybe time for one more question. So I think it's probably a good way to end it, seeing that I think a lot of us are looking forward to summer. But Jon, what are some of the travel trends that we should look for in 2023 and into 2024?
We just got out of the field with the big study for the American Society of Travel Advisors, and I haven't looked at the data yet. So I feel like, I'm basing this maybe on a couple months ago as opposed to right now. But
right.
I do see a renewed thrust towards international travel as being something that obviously that industry has been looking forward to for a while and may now be actualized. I do see a little bit of tightening, a little bit of expanding in terms of booking windows because of the demand levels. We're seeing people book their trips a lot further out, or at least relative to the way it was pre-pandemic. So I think that's a good sign for the industry. I think it's going to continue to be building upon that same phenomenon I just mentioned a moment ago about sports, and that it's about creating experiences, and there's a lot more push towards whether it's multi-generational travel or travel with a purpose or travel for ecotourism or what have you. There's a lot more specialization to create these unique experiences that people can put on their bucket list. So that's something that I think is going to be very good for the travel industry and hopefully really good for the consumer as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like they're stuck in a rut and they're doing the same things over and over again. And again, working from home is, has a lot of benefits, but it sort of contributes to that feeling of, I'm in the same place all the time. I think a lot of people are sort of feeling restless, both in their personal life and professionally. And I think that'll be reflected in travel choices. I think people are going to be a little bit more outside the box, whether that's adventure travel or road trips to places they haven't been, or I know this is a very small niche, but travel to Antarctica is kind of having a moment. It's been a lot on social media and in the news. I think people are going to be looking to get outside the box and do new and different things, as opposed to, every year we go to our house on Cape Cod or whatever it is. Those traditions around travel, I think, will be less common than a desire to experience new things.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, I think we can probably wrap it up. If you guys have more questions, I'm sure feel free to reach out to Steve or Jon. I'm sure they'd love to connect and answer any questions that we didn't get to today. With that, Jon, thank you so much. Steve, always a pleasure. And we'll do it again next year. So with that, we'll end the show for today. And everybody watching, thank you so much. Feel free to share it if you found it interesting. And we'll see you all, I think next week, if not next week, the week after. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.